My father kicked me out of the company until I apologized to my golden child sister. I just said, okay. The next morning, she strutted into the office expecting to celebrate her victory, until she found my desk completely cleared and my resignation letter sitting where my laptop used to be. The company attorney came running down the hall, face white as paper, shouting, "Tell me she didn't file it." They had no idea what I'd been planning, or how far I was willing to go to protect myself. If you've ever been punished for doing the right thing, or silenced to protect someone else's reputation, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? To understand how everything unraveled, let me take you back to the beginning. I didn't walk out of that boardroom because I was brave. I walked out because the scene was painfully familiar, just a more polished version of the house I grew up in. My childhood unfolded inside a family that lived and breathed real estate development. My parents built sterling properties from a small renovation company into one of the largest commercial developers in Texas. And for as long as I can remember, our dinner conversations sounded more like business meetings than family time. From day one, Madison fit perfectly into their vision. As the eldest daughter, she was everything a company brochure would celebrate: charismatic, photogenic, confident, the daughter who charmed investors at 12 and closed deals at 18. Adults would shake her hand and say, "There she is, the natural heir to Sterling." They said it so often that Madison started believing leadership was in her DNA. I, on the other hand, was the detail-oriented one, the girl who preferred spreadsheets to spotlight, who asked uncomfortable questions about zoning laws and environmental permits, who didn't smile on command. My father called me thorough, the way someone might describe a really good filing system, useful, reliable, and completely invisible until something went wrong. Whenever the family business hit a problem, permit issues, budget overruns, legal complications, anything too technical or tedious, it landed on my desk. "Jessica can figure it out," they'd say. And I could. But the problems I solved disappeared into silence, while Madison's victories became family legends. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in construction management and environmental law, Dad congratulated me, but immediately added, "You know, your sister just secured that downtown hotel project today. That's the kind of vision that builds empires." When I passed my contractor's license exam on the first try, he told the neighbors how proud he was. But somehow the conversation always shifted to Madison's latest media interview. The only person who ever pushed back against this imbalance was Mom. She saw me, not the version of me that was convenient, but the real one. She was the one who stayed up late helping me research sustainable building practices, the one who slipped encouraging notes into my textbooks, the one who whispered, "You don't need applause to change the world." She was the quiet balance to my father's relentless ambition. And then 3 years ago, a car accident took her away from us without warning. That was the moment our family dynamic completely collapsed. With Mom gone, Dad clung to Madison like she was his only legacy, as if promoting her could fill the space Mom used to occupy. Madison absorbed the attention effortlessly. She was built for it. I, meanwhile, became the scapegoat for every setback, every miscommunication, every crack in the empire they were desperate to maintain. It didn't matter that I was the one who quietly prevented environmental violations that could have shut us down. It didn't matter that I was the one who spotted structural issues before they became lawsuits. To Dad, I was the daughter who didn't need him, the one who would be fine on her own. And somehow, that became permission to ignore me entirely. By the time I turned 27 and became Sterling's Director of Operations and Compliance, my role was crystal clear. I was the behind-the-scenes problem solver, the one who made sure nothing collapsed. Madison was the one on magazine covers, the one giving speeches at industry conferences, the face that represented Sterling Properties to the world. At company galas, Dad would introduce her with his hand on her shoulder and pride in his voice. Our future CEO. When introducing me, he'd gesture toward a group of contractors and say, "Jessica keeps our projects legal and on schedule." It always felt like being patted on the head like a good dog. Even within the company, the hierarchy was obvious. I wrote environmental impact reports. Madison cut ribbons at groundbreaking ceremonies. I negotiated complex regulatory frameworks. She posed for photos with city officials. I kept Sterling out of lawsuits. She was celebrated for expanding our brand. And every time someone asked why I wasn't on stage with her, Dad would laugh and say, "Jessica prefers working behind the scenes. That's where she does her best work." I did do my best work there, yes, but not because I preferred being hidden. It was because someone always made sure I stayed there. Looking back, I think the suspension, the ultimatum, wasn't the beginning of our story. It was the final echo of a childhood built around one simple rule: Madison shines, and Jessica supports. And maybe that's why walking out of that boardroom felt less like rebellion and more like finally breaking free. At Sterling Properties, I was the daughter who built the foundation everyone else stood on. But only one of us was ever invited to take credit for the building, and it was never me. By the time I turned 28, my position at Sterling Properties had crystallized into something both essential and invisible. I had become Senior Director of Operations and Regulatory Compliance, a title that sounded impressive on paper, but felt surprisingly hollow in a family that measured success by newspaper headlines and industry awards. Still, I threw myself into the work, not to impress them, but because someone had to care about the parts of the business that no one else wanted to see. I built our compliance department from scratch. When I first started, Sterling's systems were a mess of outdated protocols, inconsistent safety standards, and incomplete environmental assessments that were lawsuits waiting to happen. Over the years, I rebuilt everything: environmental monitoring systems, worker safety protocols, permit tracking databases, waste management procedures, and quality control measures that actually caught problems before they became disasters. My work wasn't glamorous, but it was the reason Sterling had avoided 4 major legal catastrophes that could have bankrupted the entire company. A foundation collapse at a shopping mall caught early because of soil testing I insisted on. A chemical spill at a warehouse project contained before EPA got involved. A worker safety violation pattern stopped before OSHA launched a full investigation. A residential development halted when I discovered the land had contamination issues that previous surveys missed. The state inspections that used to make executives nervous became routine, almost boring. Our safety scores climbed into the top percentile, and inspectors started referring other companies to us as an example of how development should be done. But outside my small department, hardly anyone knew why we stayed out of trouble. Construction foremen and project managers trusted me in a way they didn't trust the executives. They brought concerns to me because they knew I wouldn't ignore safety issues to meet deadlines or cut costs. Meanwhile, Madison was busy becoming the face of Sterling Properties. While I worked through environmental regulations, she crafted marketing campaigns, glossy presentations, and a sustainable luxury brand designed to attract high-end clients willing to pay premium prices. She was on local TV at least twice a month talking about revolutionary development practices and community-centered growth. Her hair always perfect, her smile always bright, her sound bites always polished. Business magazines wrote profiles about her: the visionary behind Sterling's success, Texas's rising real estate star, the woman reimagining urban development. And every time, the quotes from my father grew more elaborate. "Madison is the strategic heart of Sterling," he told one reporter. "She inherited her mother's grace and my instinct for innovation." I would scroll through these articles quietly, noticing the single line where my name occasionally appeared. A footnote, an afterthought. Jessica Sterling oversees operational compliance. No details, no recognition, just a line that made me sound like I managed filing cabinets. The irony was almost funny. Madison built the image. I built the infrastructure that kept that image from crumbling. But at Sterling Properties and in my father's mind, the image was the business. So Madison rose, and I held everything steady beneath her, unseen. The gap between us widened with every magazine feature, every industry award ceremony, every partnership announcement showcasing her confident smile. At work, it became routine. She'd breeze into meetings late, offer bold but vague ideas, and leave early for photo shoots while I stayed behind to figure out how to make her promises actually work within legal and environmental constraints. People assumed I preferred staying in the background. They didn't realize I'd been trained there my whole life. One evening, that truth hit me harder than usual. It was nearly midnight, and the Sterling Properties building had settled into that eerie quiet only office buildings have after hours. The hum of computers, distant traffic, occasional footsteps from the cleaning crew. I was in my glass-walled office, surrounded by environmental assessment reports spread across my desk like evidence in a crime scene. A discrepancy in the soil contamination data for our newest project had caught my attention, and I couldn't let it go. Patterns don't lie. People do. I was cross-referencing pollution studies, checking permit applications, reviewing contractor certifications, work that would keep Sterling from building on contaminated land, and facing a multi-million-dollar cleanup lawsuit. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, my ponytail was falling apart, and dinner had been a forgotten energy bar somewhere under the paperwork. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes, and looked out the window toward the executive parking garage. That's when I saw her. Madison laughing with two marketing associates, walking across the lot in her designer coat and heels that clicked like a runway model. The company had just leased her a brand new Tesla as a retention incentive. The headlights lit up as she unlocked it, casting a bright glow across the concrete. She slid into the driver's seat, her silhouette perfect against the city lights, and glided away into the night like the star of her own movie. I watched her taillights disappear while my reflection stared back at me from the office window, still working, still holding everything together, still invisible, and for the first time in years, I felt something crack inside me, a quiet recognition that no matter how much I built, protected, or prevented, I would always be introduced as the daughter who handles the technical stuff, the daughter behind the scenes, the daughter they assumed would never walk away. They had no idea how wrong they were about to be. The night I watched Madison drive away in her company Tesla, I had no clue how quickly the shine of her latest success would tarnish once I looked beneath the surface. The first red flag appeared 3 days later, during what should have been a routine review of our new municipal partnership, the same deal Madison had proudly announced at the Texas Development Summit. On paper, the contract looked amazing. Expedited permitting, reduced environmental review timelines, preferential bidding status for city projects. But the moment I opened the actual agreement and started reading the fine print, my stomach dropped. The language was too smooth, too generous in the wrong places, too vague where it should have been specific. I'd seen this pattern before. I'd also watched companies get destroyed because of it. The deeper I read, the more the contract revealed its true nature. Hidden in the expedited permitting process was a clause that essentially allowed us to bypass standard environmental assessments. Another section gave us the ability to start construction before final safety inspections were complete. And buried in an appendix was the real poison pill. If Sterling didn't meet aggressive project completion deadlines, we could face financial penalties that would cripple us. But worst of all was the liability clause. If anything went wrong, environmental contamination, safety violations, construction defects, Sterling would bear full responsibility while the city officials who approved the shortcuts would be protected from legal action. This wasn't a partnership. It was a trap disguised as a favor, and one that could destroy everything we'd built. I spent the next week quietly gathering information. By Wednesday, 2 of our most experienced foremen came to my office. They closed the door and sat down, looking uncomfortable. "Ms. Sterling," one said quietly, "we're being pressured to cut corners on the safety protocols, skip some inspections, use cheaper materials, rush the timeline. Management says it's part of the new efficiency initiative." The other nodded. "Our supervisors told us to prioritize speed over everything else. We're not comfortable with it." They didn't mention Madison by name, but they didn't have to. Her fingerprints were all over anything that promised faster profits. After they left, I pulled up our project management database and ran some analysis. At first, everything looked normal, until I filtered by date. That's when the pattern hit me like a punch to the chest. Material costs had dropped 35% across 3 major projects. Safety inspection schedules had been cut in half. Environmental monitoring that used to happen weekly was now monthly. Construction timelines that should have taken 18 months were being compressed to 12. Even more alarming, these changes began exactly 2 weeks after Madison's municipal partnership contract was signed. Someone was cutting every possible corner to meet impossible deadlines, and if anything went catastrophically wrong, Sterling Properties would be holding all the liability. I dug deeper. Email chains, budget reports, contractor communications. And then I found it, the smoking gun that made my blood run cold. An internal memo from Madison to the project management team, marked Confidential, High Priority. We need to maximize efficiency on all current projects to demonstrate strong performance metrics for our municipal partners. If safety protocols slow us down, find creative solutions. If environmental reviews delay progress, work around them. We must prove we can deliver faster than any competitor. Do whatever it takes to hit these deadlines. The future of Sterling depends on it. Creative solutions, work around them, do whatever it takes. It was systematic negligence dressed up in corporate doublespeak, and she'd signed it with a smiley face emoji. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't poor judgment. It was a deliberate, coordinated plan to ignore safety and environmental regulations to meet arbitrary deadlines. And if someone got hurt, if a building collapsed, if we contaminated groundwater, Sterling Properties wouldn't just face lawsuits, we could face criminal charges. And as Director of Operations and Compliance, I would be the first person investigators looked at. That night, I stayed in my office until 3 a.m., preparing what would become a comprehensive 60-page internal report. It documented every safety shortcut, every skipped inspection, every environmental corner being cut, every regulation being bent or broken. I triple-checked every citation, every timeline, every piece of evidence. When I submitted the report the next morning, I didn't send it quietly. I sent it to my father, the board of directors, and our legal counsel simultaneously. I attached formal recommendations: immediate suspension of the Accelerated Timeline Initiative, full safety and environmental audits of all current projects, and voluntary disclosure to city officials and regulatory agencies. Within 2 hours, my father called an emergency meeting. He didn't even make eye contact as I walked into the conference room. Madison was already there, her face red with fury. The moment Dad finished skimming the report, she exploded. "Are you insane? Do you realize what you've done? You're trying to sabotage everything Dad and I have worked for. You always do this. You look for problems because you can't handle success." Her voice echoed off the glass walls. The board members stared at their hands. My father finally looked up at me, but there was no confusion, no concern for the safety violations, only cold disappointment. "Jessica," he said slowly, "why do you always have to make everything so complicated?" Complicated. That was his word for everything. Not careful, not ethical, not responsible, just complicated. Behind that word was an accusation as old as my childhood, that I was the daughter who always created problems where he wanted smooth sailing, that I was the reason harmony broke, that if I just stayed quiet, just looked the other way, just let it slide, everything would be easier. But easier for whom? For Madison? For him? For a company that was slowly turning into a machine that put profits over people's safety? I looked at the man who taught me that integrity mattered more than profit margins, and for the first time, I realized he didn't want the truth. He wanted silence, and that was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not angry, not hurt, just still, like the calm before something permanent happens. They didn't know it yet, but they had already lost me. The emergency board meeting felt less like a business discussion and more like a trial where the verdict had already been decided. I walked into the mahogany-paneled conference room with my evidence binder under my arm, still foolishly believing that facts, safety concerns, and legal obligations would matter. They didn't. Not in that room. Not with those people. The board members sat stiffly around the polished table, glancing between their copies of my 60-page report and my father's expression, waiting for cues about how outraged they should be. My father stood at the head of the table, hands pressed against the wood, jaw set in a hard line. Madison sat beside him, arms crossed, wearing a perfect mask of wounded innocence mixed with righteous anger. When my father finally spoke, he didn't address the safety violations, the skipped inspections, or the environmental shortcuts. Instead, he focused on something else entirely. "This report," he said, holding my document like it was radioactive, "has created unnecessary panic among our project teams. It's damaged morale, undermined leadership confidence, and jeopardized our relationship with key municipal partners." In that moment, I realized they weren't angry that the violations existed. They were angry that I'd documented them. One board member cleared his throat. "Jessica, We expect our directors to present solutions, not negativity. Another added, tone matters in leadership. This kind of aggressive criticism can destabilize entire departments. I stared at them, unable to process how they'd managed to twist evidence of potential criminal negligence into a conversation about my attitude. Then my father delivered the final blow, speaking with the solemnity of someone pretending to hate what he was about to do. Jessica, you leave us no choice. Effective immediately, you are suspended for 30 days without pay. He paused, watching for signs that I might break down. Before you can return, you will submit a written apology to the board and to Madison, acknowledging your role in damaging team trust and your commitment to focusing on constructive solutions rather than divisive criticism. Constructive solutions, divisive criticism. They were using corporate jargon to paper over a moral collapse. Across the table, our company attorney sat frozen, staring at his copy of my report. He knew every single thing I documented was accurate. He also knew that agreeing with me would cost him his job, maybe his career, so he stayed silent, letting fear eat whatever integrity he once had. I looked around the table at each face and realized something that felt like ice water in my veins. These people weren't capable of fixing what was broken here, and if I stayed, I would drown with them. Outwardly, I looked like the one being punished, humiliated, scapegoated. But inside, for the first time in years, something lifted in me like a weight I'd been carrying finally falling away. I felt free. I looked directly at my father. Okay. He blinked, clearly taken off guard by the complete absence of resistance, the lack of pleading or arguing. You want to suspend me? Okay. You want a written apology? You'll get one. The board seemed relieved, convinced I was folding, confused by how easily I'd accepted the punishment. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't acceptance. It was departure. As I stood to leave, Madison leaned over and whispered with smug satisfaction, "You'll never win against me, Jessica. This company is in my blood. Dad will always choose me." Her confidence would have hurt once. It didn't anymore. I gave her a small, almost gentle smile, the kind you give someone who has absolutely no idea what's coming. Because in that room, in that exact moment, I had made my decision. I would stop trying to save Sterling Properties from the inside. I would stop trying to preserve my family's reputation. I would save the workers, the communities, and the environment instead. I walked out of that boardroom without looking back, my footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. They thought they had silenced me. What they'd actually done was set me free to do the one thing they never saw coming. That evening, my apartment felt different somehow. Smaller, but also more mine than it had in years. I sat on my couch without turning on the lights, the Dallas skyline glowing through my windows. My suspension paperwork lay on the coffee table, the ink still wet, my father's signature bold and final. For the first time all day, the question I'd been avoiding finally forced itself into focus. If I report this, will I destroy the company my mother helped build? The company she believed in? The company I'd spent my entire career protecting? My chest tightened. Sterling Properties wasn't just my employer. It was childhood memories, family dinners, the sound of my mother's laugh echoing through project site trailers. Blowing the whistle felt like burning down a photo album. But doing nothing, that was something else entirely. Doing nothing meant complicity in putting people's lives at risk. I stared at my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, messy ponytail, the weight of a decision that would change everything. For years, I'd held this company together from the shadows. Tonight, it felt like the company was holding me prisoner. My phone rang. The contact read, Sarah Chen, Environmental Law Coalition. I'd met her 8 months ago at a construction safety conference. She was sharp, principled, and unafraid to challenge powerful companies when they endangered communities. I'd kept her card in my wallet just in case, never imagining I'd actually need it. My hands trembled slightly as I answered. "Jessica, are you okay? You sound stressed." "No," I admitted. "I think I'm about to do something that could destroy everything my family built." There was a pause. "Tell me what you found." And I laid it all out. The unsafe timeline pressures, the skipped safety inspections, Madison's memo encouraging corners to be cut, the board's retaliation against my report, my father's suspension ultimatum. Sarah didn't gasp or panic. She just listened carefully. Jessica, there's a federal whistleblower protection program for construction and environmental safety. It shields you from retaliation, both legally and financially. And if I stay quiet? She didn't sugarcoat the truth. If something catastrophic happens, and with the shortcuts you're describing, it probably will, you'll be the first person investigators look at as the compliance director. Silence won't protect you. Reporting will. I closed my eyes, feeling the room tilt slightly. Jessica, she continued gently, I know you're scared, but you're not the one destroying Sterling Properties. You're trying to save the part of it that's still worth saving. After we hung up, the fear didn't disappear, but it crystallized into something else. A cold, steady resolve. I walked to my bedroom and opened the small safe in my closet. Behind insurance papers and old tax documents was a sealed envelope my mother had given me before she died, labeled, "For Jessica. Open when you need strength." My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter in her careful handwriting, along with some legal documents I'd never seen before. The letter was short, but piercing. My dearest Jessica, if Sterling Properties ever becomes a company that values profit over people, you have both the right and the responsibility to stop it. Not because you owe it to us, but because you owe it to everyone who trusts us to build safely. I've always known you would be the one with the courage to choose what's right over what's easy. I'm proud of you. Mom. The legal documents were even more shocking. My mother had set up a trust holding 15% of Sterling Properties stock that had voting rights and was registered entirely in my name. She'd never told my father or Madison. I stared at the papers, my heart pounding. Mom had known. She had seen the future before I did, and she'd given me the power to act on it. At the bottom of her letter, in her distinctive handwriting, "Do what's right, sweetheart, not what's comfortable." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears slipping down my cheeks. By the time I stood up, a deep, unshakable certainty had formed inside me. The kind of certainty that only comes when you know exactly what you have to do. I returned to my computer and opened the federal whistleblower reporting portal. Then I opened my secure access to Sterling's shareholder platform. One file at a time, I began uploading everything: the safety report, Madison's memo encouraging shortcuts, the timeline pressure documentation, the evidence of skipped inspections, proof of environmental corners being cut. Everything they'd hoped would stay buried. The progress bar moved slowly, each percentage point a quiet goodbye to the life I'd known. But for the first time in years, I wasn't choosing my family's approval. I was choosing the truth. When the final document uploaded with a soft chime, I whispered to my empty apartment, "Okay." Morning came with a strange, deceptive calm. One of those bright, clear Texas days that makes everything look perfect from a distance. While I sat at my kitchen counter drinking coffee and waiting for confirmation emails from the federal portal, the other side of Dallas was waking up to a very different kind of morning. At Sterling Properties, Madison strutted through the executive entrance in designer heels, practically glowing with satisfaction. She'd chosen a power suit that photographed well, because today she was scheduled to give a presentation to 3 potential investors. Wealthy developers interested in replicating Sterling's revolutionary efficiency model in other cities. The same efficiency model built on cutting safety corners and ignoring environmental regulations that she'd proudly branded as innovative, streamlined development. Her assistant hurried beside her with a stack of presentation materials. Madison waved her off confidently. "I've got this covered. Just make sure Dad sees the client feedback before the board meeting next week." In her mind, she'd already won. She'd put her problematic little sister in her place. She'd secured the contracts of her career. She had Dad praising her leadership to every investor in Texas. Nothing, not even a 30-day suspension, was going to dim the spotlight she lived in. She reached the executive floor, still smiling. And then everything stopped. At the end of the hallway, past the frosted glass conference rooms, sat my office. Or rather, what used to be my office. The door was propped open. The lights were off. My desk was completely bare. Not just cleared. Stripped. No computer, No files, no personal photos, no coffee mug, not even the small cactus I'd kept by my monitor. Just one white envelope sitting in the exact center of the polished desk. My resignation letter. The company laptop sat beside it, powered down and wiped clean. My access badge lay next to it, deactivated as of 4 a.m. when I'd walked out for the last time. A few doors down, my father stood in his office, holding my printed resignation letter with both hands. His eyes kept scanning the same 4 paragraphs, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something he could accept. He'd expected a fight, expected tears, anger, bargaining, expected me to come crawling back, asking for forgiveness like I had when I was 10 years old. What he got instead was 4 professionally written paragraphs and a signature that didn't waver. His hands were shaking now. Madison appeared in his doorway, frowning when she saw his expression. "Dad, relax. It's just Jessica being dramatic. She'll get over it and come back when she realizes no one else will hire her." Before she could finish the thought, the office door burst open. David Kumar, Sterling's general counsel, rushed in at full speed, his hair disheveled, tie askew, face drained of all color. He looked like someone running from a building collapse. He pointed at the letter in Dad's hands, then looked toward my empty office. "Tell me," he gasped, "that she didn't file it." My father looked confused. "File what?" "The report. The safety violations, the environmental shortcuts, the documentation of regulatory violations. She had enough evidence to trigger a federal investigation. Tell me she didn't submit it to the whistleblower portal." I stepped into the doorway at that moment. David's eyes went wide like he was seeing a ghost. "I submitted everything," I said calmly. "Fully documented, properly formatted, time-stamped, and legally protected. The federal portal has already acknowledged receipt." David sank into the nearest chair. Madison's face contorted in disbelief. "You what?" I ignored her, turning to my father. "And as the voting authority for Mom's Trust, which holds 15% of Sterling's shares, I formally requested an emergency board review of all current safety protocols, effective immediately." The silence that followed wasn't the polished quiet of boardrooms. It was the stunned, breathless silence of people watching their world crack apart. My father's mouth opened and closed like he couldn't find words. "Voting authority? Jessica, what are you talking about?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Mom didn't trust you or Madison to protect Sterling's integrity when profit was at stake. She trusted me." And then the sound started. At first, just one notification chime from the computer in the corner. Then another, and another. Suddenly, like a chain reaction, every device in the office began buzzing, pinging, ringing. Phones, tablets, laptops, the wall-mounted conference screen. Notifications flooded in like a digital avalanche. Ding. David looked at his phone and went even paler. "It's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They've received a formal whistleblower complaint regarding Sterling Properties." Ding. "Emergency board session called for this afternoon." Ding. "Madison Sterling excluded from all safety-related meetings pending investigation." Ding. "All current construction projects under immediate review." Ding. "Municipal partnership contract suspended pending federal audit." It was like watching a dam burst in real time. Madison reached for my arm desperately. "Jessica, stop this. Fix it. You're in compliance and you know how to make problems disappear." I stepped back calmly. "I'm not your cleanup crew anymore." My father looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the foundation of his world. "Jessica, please. We can work this out. We can discuss this. Not like this." I held up my hand. "No. For years you told me to stay quiet, be supportive, avoid making waves." I gestured to the barrage of alerts exploding across every screen in the office. "This is what happens when you choose silence over safety." The final notification appeared on the main conference room display, large and impossible to ignore. Federal whistleblower investigation initiated Sterling Properties Development, Dallas, TX Construction. Safety and environmental violations. Congressional hearings scheduled. Madison made a sound like she couldn't breathe. My father sat down heavily, my resignation letter still clutched in his hands, and I walked out, steady, unshaken, unbroken, knowing this was only the beginning. 6 months passed. Months that reshaped everything Sterling Properties had claimed to represent, everything my father believed he controlled, and everything I'd once allowed myself to carry in silence. The federal investigation moved with swift precision. Once the whistleblower files were opened, the evidence spoke louder than any corporate spin Madison had ever crafted. The findings were damning: systematic safety violations, deliberate environmental shortcuts, worker endangerment, and executive negligence. Sterling Properties was hit with fines so massive they made front-page news across Texas. Construction projects were halted. Contracts were terminated. Insurance companies dropped coverage. The company that once dominated Dallas development became a cautionary tale. To avoid bankruptcy, the board sold controlling interest to a national construction firm known for prioritizing worker safety and environmental responsibility. The Sterling name stayed on the buildings for brand recognition, but everyone understood the truth. The empire had been humbled, restructured, and stripped of its reckless leadership. My father, once the untouchable CEO whose name was etched on half the skyscrapers in downtown Dallas, lost all executive authority. The new ownership offered him a face-saving transition: part-time project consultant for small residential developments, far from any major decision-making. He told industry contacts he was returning to his construction roots. But inside the family, we all knew his kingdom was gone. Madison's fall was even more spectacular. The investigation didn't just cost her the job, it exposed her incompetence, her willingness to gamble with people's lives for the sake of impressive quarterly reports. The golden child of Texas real estate, as one magazine had once called her, became the executive whose shortcuts nearly killed people. Professional relationships evaporated overnight. Industry conferences stopped inviting her. Her LinkedIn went quiet. When the media attention died down, she quietly moved to Arizona and started selling residential properties for a mid-tier real estate firm. Her social media showed sunny selfies and motivational quotes about new beginnings. But there was something hollow in her smile, the look of someone whose spotlight had been permanently turned off. As for me, when the investigation concluded, I received job offers from 7 different firms: environmental law groups, construction safety organizations, and development companies that valued integrity over image. The offer that felt right came from a coalition of community-focused builders, companies that specialized in affordable housing, green construction, and worker-owned cooperatives. I joined them as Director of Ethical Development, a position that was lighter than any title I'd held before, not because it was easier, but because it didn't require me to hide other people's crimes or enable their recklessness. I slept better. I breathed easier. I went to work without armor. My new colleagues asked for my opinions instead of my silence. They included me in leadership instead of using me as a shield. And for the first time in my career, my job felt like an extension of my values, not a betrayal of them. With a stable income and a clear conscience, I bought a small house in East Dallas, one with big windows facing downtown, and a backyard where I could see both the skyline I'd helped build and the horizon beyond it. I adopted a rescue dog, a scrappy pit bull mix with one floppy ear who followed me from room to room like he was afraid I'd disappear. I named him Cooper, and he filled a quiet space in my life I didn't realize had been empty. Some evenings I'd sit on my back porch with Cooper at my feet, watching the sunset behind the buildings my family once owned, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Real, bone-deep peace. One evening, as I finished reviewing safety protocols for a new affordable housing project, I realized something profound had settled inside me. For the first time in my life, the work I was doing matched the person I wanted to be. In that quiet moment, the truth crystallized with perfect clarity. They thought suspending me would teach me a lesson about family loyalty. Instead, it taught me the lesson they never expected, that my conscience was worth more than their approval. Freedom wasn't dramatic. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, earned, and entirely mine. 2 years slipped by before my father appeared at my door. Not at my office, not through a carefully worded email from an assistant, not in some neutral conference room. He came to my house on a rainy Saturday afternoon, the kind of gray Dallas day where the sky hangs low and heavy. Cooper barked once before settling beside me as I opened the door. The man standing there looked almost like a stranger. My father, once the commanding presence who could silence a boardroom with a look, now stood slightly hunched, hands deep in the pockets of a worn jacket, hair grayer and thinner than I remembered. His eyes, once sharp with authority, were softer now, shadowed with something that looked like exhaustion, or maybe humility. "Jessica," he said quietly, "could we talk?" For a moment I hesitated, not from anger, but because I needed to make sure my heart was steady enough to handle whatever version of him had arrived. I stepped aside and let him in. He looked around my small living room, the books, the dog toys, Cooper's bed by the window, the view of downtown Dallas in the distance, and something in his face shifted. Recognition, maybe, or regret. He sat carefully on my couch, hands clasped. I waited. "The company," he began, his voice rougher than I remembered. "It's different now. Smaller. The new management brought in auditors, changed all the protocols, stripped away everything we thought made us special." He paused. "They even replaced the logo." There was a tremor in his voice, like watching an empire die happened in waves. "Not all at once. But it's still operating," he added quickly, as if trying to convince himself. "Still building. Just differently." I nodded. "Different can be better." He gave a hollow laugh. "I never thought it would go this far. I didn't think your report would lead to all of this. The investigation, the fines, the takeover." I leaned forward slightly. "Dad, it didn't go this far. It was already this far. You just didn't want to see it." He winced, not dramatically, just enough for me to know the words hit home. Silence stretched between us, heavy with years of things we'd never said out loud. Then, carefully, I asked the question that had lived in my chest since childhood. "Dad, did you protect Madison because she was the oldest, or because when you looked at her, you saw yourself?" He froze. No deflection, no corporate doublespeak, no boardroom confidence, just stillness. For a long time, longer than I expected, he didn't answer. He stared at his hands as if searching through decades of choices for the right place to begin. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You were so capable," he said slowly. "So independent. Even as a kid, you solved your own problems. You solved everyone's problems. And Madison," he swallowed hard, "she always needed something. Guidance, approval, validation. It made me feel useful." The words hung in the air, ancient and raw. "So I gave her more," he admitted. "More attention, more opportunities, more trust." He looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I didn't realize I was taking those things away from you." I didn't speak. I let him continue. "You were the strong one," he whispered. I leaned on that. I leaned too hard. And by the time I understood what I was doing, it was easier to keep things the way they were than to face what I'd done wrong. Easier for him. Devastating for me. I took a slow breath. "Dad, I'm not coming back. Not to Sterling. Not to fix your reputation. Not to help rebuild the company image. That part of my life is over." He nodded, almost like he'd expected it. "If you want a relationship with me," I said, steady and clear, "it has to be based on who we actually are now, not who you need me to be. No strategy, no ulterior motives, just honesty." My father's composure cracked slightly. Not broken, but softened in a way I'd never seen before. A man finally stripped of titles, excuses, and the need to always be right. "Jessica," he said, voice shaking for the first time in my memory, "I'm sorry that my strongest daughter had to become the one who protected herself from me. For years, I'd imagined what it would feel like to hear him say something like that. I thought it might hurt, or heal, or satisfy some buried need for validation. Instead, it just felt real, human, long overdue. I didn't forgive him in that moment. Healing doesn't happen on command. But I let him sit there in my living room, in the quiet space we'd never shared before. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, something that had been broken for a very long time began, slowly, to shift. 3 years passed. Years that softened the sharp edges of everything that came before. Years that allowed me to build something I'd never dared to imagine I could want. By then, I had created something entirely my own. Not a construction empire, not a family legacy, but a consulting firm dedicated to the one thing Sterling Properties had forgotten: building with integrity instead of corners cut by fear. My company specialized in helping family-owned construction and development firms navigate generational transitions without repeating the quiet destructions I'd grown up watching. I taught boards how to separate love from liability, ambition from ethics, legacy from ego. Fathers brought daughters to my workshops. Mothers brought sons. Siblings came together, not to compete for approval, but to learn how to build something sustainable without destroying each other in the process. I helped them construct frameworks where everyone could succeed without someone else having to fail. And in doing so, I rebuilt parts of myself that I'd forgotten existed. My father attended one of my seminars for the first time on a crisp autumn morning. He didn't tell me he was coming. I only noticed him at the end, sitting in the back row, hands folded, listening with the quiet attention of someone finally willing to learn instead of lead. When the session ended, he didn't rush to the front to introduce himself or network with other attendees. He waited until the crowd thinned, then approached slowly, cautiously, like he wasn't sure he had the right to enter the space I'd created. He didn't offer advice. He didn't apologize again. He didn't try to claim credit for my success. He simply put his arms around me in a brief, careful hug and said, "You turned your pain into something that helps families stay whole. Your mother would be so proud." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the climax of a movie. It was small, human, and real. And that was enough. Our relationship, not broken, not magically fixed, settled into something honest. We had dinner occasionally, conversations that wandered between books we were reading, the small construction projects he worked on, the tomatoes he was learning to grow in his backyard, the topics we'd once used as weapons, business strategy, family legacy, success, were quietly retired. Sterling Properties existed between us not as an empire or a wound, but simply as something that had happened, something we'd both survived. He never asked me to help rebuild it. I never offered. That chapter had closed. And somewhere in those quiet dinners, in the easy laughter and comfortable silences, something else grew. A reclamation of what family could be when ambition stopped suffocating it. Many nights, after finishing a consultation or reviewing a family business transition plan, I'd sit in my small office. No Sterling crest on the door, no legacy looming over my shoulder. Just my name and a team of people who respected me for who I was, not whose daughter I happened to be. I would lean back in my chair, close my eyes, and let the stillness settle around me. Cooper would be curled up by my feet, the Dallas skyline twinkling through my window, my phone quiet except for texts from friends asking about weekend plans. And in that peace, I found the words that felt true enough to end this story with, words I'd speak to anyone who finds themselves caught between loyalty and integrity. My father wanted me to apologize, to keep the peace, to smooth over the surface, to maintain the silence that kept everyone comfortable. I said okay, but not to his game. I agreed with my own conscience instead, because silence in the face of wrongdoing isn't neutrality. It's participation. Sometimes the thing that breaks everything they built isn't betrayal. It's the truth. And sometimes the only victory you need is walking away and letting them face the consequences of the choices they fought so hard to defend. Years after the boardrooms, the investigations, the fall of an empire, I sit in my own office with sunlight on my desk, Cooper sleeping by the door, and my small team working on projects that actually matter. There's no title to fight for, no legacy to inherit, no father's approval to chase. There's only the life I chose, and for the first time, a life that finally chose me back. No one can suspend me now. No one can silence me. No one can decide my worth for me. For the first time in my life, my future carries only one signature, my own.